My colleague Theresa Good and I are going to try and steer this challenging conversation at the end of the day and standing between you and the refreshments. So we are going to try and make this as short as possible, yet still hearing the interesting views that this distinguished panel has. Is that right, Theresa?
That's right. Short is the order of the day, and we really appreciate. One of our panelists said, you've heard enough from Canada today, so thank you. And one of our panelists is on his way to the airport. So, why don't we go ahead?
Well, you have heard so many things today. We have heard the inspiring views of ministers, ministerial delegates, experts, heads of international research organizations, all very inspiring and with an extremely high level of awareness. And in the last panel, we have heard the views of international scientific organizations. Now we go national. So we would like to hear from different national perspectives, what would be your plans for the future, based on what you have heard today maybe, based on inspirations. So we have just one question for you, for the sake of making it short. We would like to see if it is possible that you restrict your answer to 2 minutes each. Challenging as ever. Thank you for trying. So maybe may I start with Melanie from UKRI, please.
Great, and please introduce yourself for the panel.
Thank you. So I am Melanie Welham. I am the Executive Chair for the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. And you heard from our Chief Executive, Ottiline Liza, earlier. And to keep this really short and really brief, I'm actually going to pick up on something that she said. And I think the thing that I have taken away, but I think is encapsulated in a lot of the discussions that we've had today, is about how we can make sure that we are more connected. We really recognize the need to work together globally to tackle some of these challenges. But I think we've also recognized that actually having diversity of approaches is actually fundamental. And there is a huge connectivity between frontier fundamental science and our ability to solve some of the challenges that we had set out so fantastically earlier. So I think the two things for me really come back to connectivity and diversity. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Melanie. Let's move to South Africa. Fulufhelo.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me not repeat anything that has been said. We have had much information since the beginning of the day. But what's very critical for me would be to start from where Val ended, around the 36, that brings the context within which one finds themselves. So if I speak for South Africa, we're talking about a country that has an unemployment rate of over 30% at the moment. We're talking about a country that has over 1/3 of the population on social support grants. That's about 20 million people. You're talking about a country that over 75% of the youth are unemployed. And I'm talking about 75% of the youth who are eligible for employment, but who are not employed. That then brings a particular context that says we need to actually ensure that the science that we fund has to make impact. You can stretch the stats that Val said earlier, even about Africa. According to the World Economic Forum, there's a view that by the year 2030, Africa will be home to 42% of the world's youth population. So you can all imagine what will then happen if you have this 42% of the world youth unengaged meaningfully. That's a recipe for disaster. So if you look at it in that context and you look at what we do have instruments within South Africa that are supposed to support researchers along the entire value chain of the innovation ecosystem, from the fundamental science to the applied science. And within this particular space, we have a number of instruments. I'm not going to go through them. Centers of excellence, research chairs, and we also even offer research chairs within the continent And the whole idea being that we can't just be South Africa that's doing good science, but the rest of the continent is left behind. With that said, there are a lot of issues that are at play that become challenges. The key one, in my view, is funding. And the issue of funding is an issue of how do you ensure that science on the continent or science in South Africa is funded correctly at the right scales and meaningfully. Meaningfully meaning that if you have a partnership, for example, between South Africa and a country, let's say in Europe, is funding and the flow of the research coordination and instruments in a manner that is meaningful. It's just, it's still Europe or it's still one particular country on the global north doing the work and sort of, supporting a little bit of a sprinkling of research by, allowing mobility. It's a question of how do we ensure that research is well funded. That's the key component. The other element is that we have to understand the issues around the local context inequalities. We have rural universities, you have other universities that are in the urban areas. All of these universities have different challenges. And it's a question of understanding that we need to then develop adequate capacity across all of those universities. I'm not going to go further than this, but maybe one key point that is worth mentioning here is now ensuring that we can actually communicate with our leaders about the value of science, fundamental or applied. We should be able to communicate that science and say, this science is going to make impact, and this is the reason why it needs to be prioritized. So communication becomes a very critical component. Amongst all other issues that have been mentioned about fostering a meaningful collaboration between the country and the global and the countries in the global north. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for concentrating on young researchers.
Okay.
It's on. You just speak.
Okay. Okay, my name is Yoshinao Mishima, and I'm a president of Japan Agency for Medical Research and Development. And this AMED was established in 2015, so which is a very young, institute. But the Japanese biggest funding agency for medical research areas. So I just like to point out today that the bridging basic research and the practical applications in the industry, or overcoming the so-called barrier of death, as a persistent barrier and a key issue for science and technology policies worldwide. And I believe that attempts to do so are being made around the world in a variety of different ways. And AMED also has several projects aimed to bridging the gap to industry. And that AMED is now running two types of project, two types of project which is aiming to develop fundamental research in Japan and to transform it into pharmaceutical approvals with the creation of innovative new drugs, okay? And the first one, this is a project is called a Project Promoting Clinical Trials for Development of New Drugs. And in this case, the funding is in the last stage of project. In other words, just for 1 mile to finish. Okay, so this is funding for the last stages of this transfer into the industries. And second one is another initiative is ongoing to promote the commercialization of AMED-supported pharmaceutical project with the cooperation of the pharmaceutical industry. And this was established to serve as a connoisseur for promising research seeds from a corporate perspective and to guide the drug discovery process. This is just a very early stage of this research on the seed of the new drugs. We are asking industry people to work together with the young scientists or the scientists or researchers the industry people listen to the detail of the seeds, and then we start keeping the advice for these researchers from the beginning all the way to the shifting to the social society implementation. So this is one of our effort in realizing this research seeds to the stage of the real, the drug development, creating the drugs. Okay, so that's our experience. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing the industry cooperation. Maybe we move to...
Right, so I just figured what I've heard so far is something about making sure that we had equity, that we really, everyone participated, that we are impactful with our partnerships, that we make sure that the funding is impactful, and we cannot leave behind all of those future scientists that are in Africa, and making sure that they're engaged and build capacity. And we have to think about bridging that valley of death and how we collaborate with industry. So maybe perhaps now we could hear from Australia.
Is this on? So thank you. I'm Anne Kelso. I'm CEO of the National Health and Medical Research Council in Australia, which is the lead agency for funding health and medical research. There are many things I could say, but I'll just say one thing, and that is to express concern that many of our parliamentarians don't understand what basic science is and why we need it. I think there's an enormous task for us all to do, whether we're funders or researchers or policymakers or anyone, to communicate why we need basic science. I'm concerned that it can be easily seen as a luxury that we can't afford in times of fiscal stress, as many countries are experiencing today. And it's a never-ending task. Parliamentarians come and go. So I think this level of communication is crucial for everything that we've talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent and very right to the point, and that's not specific of Australia, I can tell you. Let's precisely take a moment perhaps to look at things from a research performing organization. So I would like to invite Antoine Petit to continue.
Yes, thank you very much. I will be short. It's complicated to be original after such a day. And in fact, I'm a bit uncomfortable because I have the impression that we're just between us. Scientists speak to scientists. But that's not the issue. The issue is that we come to convince decision makers, politicians, and citizens. And really, I think that we have to recall them what are the basics. And I think that basics is fundamental research. We all agree, if I make a poll, who is in favor of fundamental research? You will all raise your hand, but that's not the problem. The problem is to convince my minister, my ministers, probably she's convinced, but the other minister, prime minister, and so on. I think we have to work more and more with industry. And CNRS, we do basic research, but nevertheless, we work a lot with industry. And I think it's important. And we also have to work with citizens, because at the end, at least in a democracy, they're the ones who decide. So I think that we should spend much more time, not to convince ourselves, because we are, but to convince the others.
Great point. Thank you very much, Antoine. And now we would like to invite Paula Eerola from Finland.
Thank you. So I'm Paula Eerola, former Academy of Finland and nowadays Research Council of Finland, so that we just changed our name. We are a funding agency. But just 2 minutes minus something. So first of all, so of course, even if we are mostly talking about the competitive funding, so that science needs basic funding, which secures the continuity, and while then the competitive funding brings in the quality and the renewal. And then from the funding agency's point of view, so that of course we need up-to-date funding portfolio, so that at least we know what is the purpose of each funding instruments, and so that we know what we want to achieve. So whether that is the bottom-up or top-down or something in between. And talking sort of regionally, so for example, strategic choices, so that we in the Nordic countries have cooperate quite a lot about around the Arctic. And because in most of the, for example, climate change tipping points are either in the Arctic or in the subarctic, Antarctic regions. And then a point that maybe was not mentioned so much here is that there should also be a possibility for rapid actions, like we and many other funding agencies also did at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that what we, for example, did in Finland, so that we launched 2 separate calls one for all fields, but COVID-related, and another one for vaccines and medications. And we could launch it very quickly because that was targeted to the researchers that already had grants from us, and therefore they were high quality recognized researchers, and they were we got them to implement or change their research directions to get the results fast, and that was very successful. But thank you. I think that we can continue the roundtable probably around some drinks soon. Thank you.
Oh, that's a wonderful suggestion. I just want to reiterate that what we heard is not only do our parliamentarians not understand the value of science, but perhaps our citizens and the taxpayers don't always understand it. And so as we partner with the citizens to co-generate technology or with industry, that it is really important to include them in the beginning, that we need to be strategic in what we do, and that in the ways that we mobilize for COVID, it may be really important soon, perhaps it's been past being important, to mobilize around climate change. It's just how do we get the citizens to recognize that it is an issue today. One of the things that was really kind of compelling about when I was doing budget hearings at NSF is the day that I was arguing to fund more things directly towards climate change, even if we got budget cuts, it was the day of the Canadian wildfires, where the smoke was pretty heavy in Washington, and they said, well, why, if we're going to cut your budget by 10%, will you still do this? And I said, just go outside and breathe. And then they said, oh, I got it. And so perhaps we all need to do that. But I am keeping us from drinking. Last words from you, Lidia.
Last word to thank all the speakers, and thank you all for your great contributions, and let's enjoy drinks together outside.